Hey traders, welcome back to the weekly Forex Forecast. Last week was a bit of a slow week because we had Thanksgiving on the Thursday, and the dollar is still continuing to trend down towards the 102 area. This was an area I highlighted in previous videos where if we're starting to see yields peaking, as we are seeing, generally speaking, you can see the dollar index selling off around 5%. So I do think there is further to go to the downside. I do still favor risk off setups heading into next week with stocks so overextended. However, I am putting US dollar shorts back on the table again next week. So if we look at the scores for the coming week, you can see that the Japanese yen is still at the bottom, but we've started to bottom in the scorecards. And this is not a surprise. This is something I've kind of been expecting. It's why I haven't been trading yen shorts. And I did highlight in previous videos how we're trading into that major low technically in the yen as well. So combined with the technical bounce we saw last week from the low and also the scorecards bottoming, I am once again going to leave Japanese yen because it's not a great short and it's not a great long as it currently stands. When the time is right, I will put the yen pairs back on the table. Heading into next week, however, you can see still there's really a lack of direction in Forex markets. We're seeing a lot of these currencies just kind of neutral in the scorecards. However, the two markets to the upside that I do like heading into next week are both the euro and the Swiss franc. And I'm primarily going to be looking to pair those with the Canadian dollar. You know, Canadian dollar shorts has been something I've been highlighting in recent videos. And once again, going into this week, I really do like crude oil shorts as well. Crude oil is a market that's been selling off and it does look like it's going to continue to the downside. So those oil derivatives, like the commodity currencies like the Canadian dollar, you could even look outside into the Norwegian kroner, etc. But I also like the short bias setup on those as well. So going to be looking at CAD shorts primarily heading into next week versus the Swiss franc and the euro. And alongside that, I'm also going to be looking at New Zealand and pound shorts versus the Swiss franc and the euro as well. And although those are my main setups and I'm going to be looking at trading heading into next week, I am also putting on the table US dollar shorts versus the euro and also versus the Swiss franc next week. And in fact, we're also going to look at the pound versus the US dollar as well. You can see these are both evenly matched in the scorecards, and there's a very good chance that pound dollar kind of lacks direction next week. Okay, so let's have a look at the market, starting with crude oil. And crude oil is a market we cover every week, but it is a market that I do like heading into next week. It is one of my favorite markets. It's not highlighting gold, but it is one of my favorite markets heading into next week. I have been highlighting shorts recently in the videos in crude oil, and we are continuing to trend lower. So what I'll be looking for is one of two things going into next week. Any pullback, and I need to see a pullback first, correction, consolidation in this market, is viewed as an opportunity intra-week to start to look for bearish breakouts, break of the trend. We're going to look in a minute in the video. I'll show you some of these from last week, which broke out like this kind of intra-week. We saw that in gold and silver. We'll see that later on in the video. But any kind of intra-week breakout is viewed as an opportunity to look for shorts into the 71 area. And if we hold this trend line and we hold this trend line and we test into the prior high, this is the second place next week. I'd be looking for a near-term short opportunity in crude oil. So the first Forex pair we're going to look at is EurCad. Now, EurCad didn't really go very far last week, but heading into this week, you can see it's really trending nicely to the upside. And I do favor long positions in EurCad next week. You can see we're consolidating, or we're correcting, I should say, from the high here really nicely in this kind of flag pattern. And going into next week, any continued pullback is viewed as an opportunity to look for a bullish breakout of this correction. Intra-week, I'll be looking for a run into the prior high of the 1.5050. And the second thing I'm going to be looking for next week, if we fail to break out of this correction and we just continue to trend down, if we trade into, and you can see it's right at a previous high over here, if we trade into the 1.47750, this will be the second place next week. I'll be looking for a near-term bounce in EurCad. Next pair is Euro New Zealand. Now, I can either be long this market or do nothing next week. Selling this market is not an option. And with Euro New Zealand and New Zealand franc, so the New Zealand pairs or any pairs with a New Zealand dollar in them, you have to pay attention to the upcoming interest rate out of New Zealand on Wednesday next week. This means that New Zealand pairs are probably going to do nothing Monday to Wednesday until this event takes place, and they're likely to just consolidate or correct. But regardless of the outcome, I'm going to show you the two ways I'd be looking at trading this after the event itself on Wednesday. Regardless of the outcome, I can either be long Euro New Zealand next week or do nothing. So what I'm going to be looking for is I'm going to be looking for this market to continue to pull back and correct into Wednesday. And then one of two things will happen. Either we get the interest rate decision and that causes a rally and a breakout to the upside in this market, in which case I'll be looking for a pullback following the breakout and the interest rate decision. I'll look for a follow through into the 1.81250. Or the second thing next week is, for whatever reason, we get a sell-off in this market. And very often, usually you have these news events. If you kind of sell off and you're looking to fade the news event, it's a good idea maybe to wait till the next day at least, just to give it some time to settle. But if we sell off on the New Zealand interest rate decision, I'm still only going to be looking to be long Euro New Zealand. So I'll be looking for the market sell-off, and perhaps even on Thursday, I'll be coming in looking for a short-term bounce from the 1.7750 area. So fading interest rate decisions, they do come with some risk, because there's nothing wrong with sitting those out altogether if you're not comfortable trying to fade interest rate decisions. And the final euro pair is euro pound. I do prefer the other two here, but any pullback in this market or continued pullback is viewed as an opportunity next week to start to look for an intra-week breakout to the upside. And we're going to be looking up to the 0.8730 in this prior high over here. And if we continue to pull back and we trend all the way down, especially if we test this low right in this kind of lower bound here, if we just trend down next week and we test the 0.8610, and perhaps this low would be great. This is going to be the second place next week. I'll be looking for a short-term bounce in euro pound. So when I'm talking about a bounce from the upper or lower bounds throughout the week, what am I actually talking about? I'm talking about the 1 or 2 days worth of solid moves you tend to get from these upper and lower bounds. And euro pound, which was highlighted in last week's video, is a good example of this. Traded into its lower bound and we had a really solid up day once we traded into the lower bound. Euro New Zealand as well, highlighted in last week's video, another really solid up day once we traded into the lower bound. And in fact, these 1 to 2 day moves are the opportunities that I actually teach throughout the week GMT members to capture. So when I talk about a short-term bounce from the upper or lower bounds, that's exactly what I'm referring to. Moving on to the franc pairs, starting with CAD franc. Now, CAD franc is a market that really didn't go anywhere last week, but I do like this on my watch list to the downside coming into this week. Any continued pullback in this market is viewed as an opportunity to look for bearish breakouts intra-week down to the 0.6390 area. And if we continue to pull back and we hold this and we test the upper bound here at 0.6520, this is the second place next week. I'll be looking for a near-term sell-off and short opportunity in CAD franc. Next is New Zealand franc. Again, we have the interest rate decision on Wednesday, so I'm going to be looking for this market to kind of drift around into Wednesday. And then on Wednesday, I'm going to be looking for one of two things. I can either short this market or do nothing. I can't buy this market next week. So any consolidation into Wednesday, I'm going to be looking for a sell-off on the interest rate decision itself, and then a pullback, and then that's going to be the opportunity for a follow-through trade into the 0.530 next week. Or conversely, if we just kind of chop around, very similar to what we discussed with Euro New Zealand, and then on the interest rate decision itself, for whatever reason, we get a rally in this market. Coming into Thursday morning, I am going to be looking for a potential opportunity to fade that interest rate decision from the upper bound. And the final franc pair is pound franc. Any continued push higher is an opportunity next week to start to look for shorts. I can only short this or do nothing. Buying it is not an option. So if we push up, and we may even test the previous high over here and get this kind of double top, but if we start to push up and before we test the upper bound, we break down intra-week, I'm going to be looking for a pullback and I'm going to be looking for a follow through and a short into the prior lows over here at the 1.101 roughly. And if we hold this trend and we push all the way into the 1.1200, this is the second place next week. I'll look for a near-term short opportunity in pound franc. Moving on to the dollar pairs, and I do have a short bias in the US dollar going into next week. So what I'd like to see here is I'd like to see this market pull back and perhaps even test the low over here for this kind of ABC correction. And if we start to break out before we test the lower bound next week, I'm going to be looking for a potential intra-week move into the 1.10250. And if we hold this and instead of breaking out, we pull all the way back and test the lower bound, especially if we test these lows right in here, very much like Euro Pound, Euro New Zealand from last week's video, this will be the second place next week. I'll be looking for a near-term buy opportunity in Euro Dollar. Next is US dollar franc. We're consolidating sideways, so I'd like to see this pullback first, and any pullback intra-week like this, I am going to be looking for a breakout before we test the upper bound, and any breakout I'm going to be looking for a pullback and a follow-through trade into the 0.8730. And again, like all the other markets, if we hold this pullback and we pull back all the way, test the prior highs over here, right in the upper bound, this is going to be the second place I'm going to be looking for a near-term short in US dollar franc next week. And the final Forex pair with the US dollar before we move on to gold and silver is pound dollar. We are pushing higher and we tested right into the upper bound from last week's video. What I'd like to see though is going into next week, I have a bullish bias on this market now. Any pullback is viewed as an opportunity to look for a breakout intra-week. And I'm going to be looking up towards the 1.2750. And if we hold this trend and instead we just correct all the way down and we test this low here, right in the 1.2450 area, it's the second place next week. I'll look for a near-term buy opportunity and bounce in pound dollar. Wrapping up the video with gold and silver, and because I do have a bearish bias on the US dollar heading into next week, I do favor once again silver and gold opportunities to the upside. And earlier on in the video, we looked at Euro New Zealand, Euro Pound from last week, two setups which bounced from the lower bounds. But gold last week was a great example of an intra-week breakout. As you can see, broke out really nicely intra-week, traded right into its upper bound. In fact, just wicked the upper bound, and that was the entire move for the week in gold. So coming into this week, once again, any pullback in this market is viewed as an opportunity to look for an intra-week breakout into the 20250. And if we instead fail to break out and we pull all the way back and we test the 1980 area, this is the second place next week. I'll be looking for a near-term bounce to the upside in gold. And last but not least, we have silver. Silver also broke out intra-week, but it didn't quite get to its upper bound. But I do think, especially with the weaker dollar, if we're going to see the dollar coming lower, I do think silver to the upside is looking like a fairly attractive market next week. So any pullback, and we've actually broken out, look at this momentum. We've actually just broken out of this consolidation, this kind of pennant. And going into next week, what I'll be looking for is I'll be looking for this to start to pull back and to start to flag this kind of momentum and then correction, this kind of bull flag setup. And then any breakout intra-week, once again, I'll be looking up towards the 25 area. Or alternatively, if we fail to actually pull back and break out before testing the lower bound, so instead we come all the way back down, especially if we test these lows here, this would be the second place next week. I'd be looking for a near-term buy opportunity in silver. So that is it for me for this week, guys. As always, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, why not consider joining us in the room each day where I go through these markets and the setups that I'm personally looking at with members on a daily basis for over 75 markets in different asset classes, including stocks, bonds, Forex, and commodities.